Hey everyone, welcome back to the Library and Museum's YouTube channel, and welcome back to another installment of our series, the Cemetery Strolls, where we learn about interesting Hopkins Countyans by visiting and paying our respects at their final resting places. Today's stroll takes us to Old Salem Cemetery, which is another fairly old graveyard here in the county. This cemetery is located just off Highway 813, just east of the town of Mortons Gap. Not to be confused with the Old Salem near Hanson, which I wasn't aware of until recently, so there are two Old Salems in Hopkins County. But this is the Mortons Gap Old Salem. The church here, Salem Missionary Baptist Church, was established in September 1841, but the graveyard itself didn't come into being until the late 1860s, early 1870s. If you're standing in front of the church, we're going to start our stroll here to the left of the building. I thought it would be easier to take our stroll in sections since this is a decent-sized cemetery. The first notable individual that we come across here on the left side of the church is a World War II soldier named Basil M. Whitfield. Basil was born on September 11, 1925, and grew up in the Mortons Gap area. At age 11, he joined the church here, the Salem Missionary Baptist Church. At age 19, he was inducted into the U.S. Army and soon shipped off to Europe after basic training. He had only been overseas for 3 weeks when he was killed in action in France on November 26, 1944. Here you see him buried next to his parents, Isla and Rena Whitfield. In addition to his parents, he also left behind a young wife named Margaret and a young son named Johnny. Not far from Private Whitfield, we find another World War II soldier who sadly wasn't able to make it home after the war. Virgil L. Offutt was born on August 7, 1926, to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Luther Offutt. He joined the Army in August 1944 and was soon sent to the Pacific Theater. Private Virgil Offutt sadly died on November 8, 1945, after being wounded the day before on Luzon in the Philippines. This was a little late in the war, being November of 45, since the Japanese had already surrendered in August. But some troops unfortunately remained unaware of the surrender, so fighting sadly had continued. And here are some of the folks that I'm connected to here at Old Salem. My grandparents Oscar and Dorothy are there to the far left with my Uncle Wallace and Aunt Wilda to the right. I never got to meet Wilda because she died at around 2 back in the 1930s. Then there are my great-grandparents here to the left again, and some other cousins and relatives as well, so it's always good to stop and spend a little time with them. Just down from where my grandparents are, there's another soldier, this time from the Vietnam era, named Gary Bruce Nichols. Gary was born on August 11, 1947, in Detroit, Michigan. When he was young, his family moved here to Hopkins County, where they lived for about 10 years, so some of his most impressionable years were here. He went to Mortons Gap Elementary School, attended South Hopkins, and also went to church here at Old Salem. Eventually, his family moved back to Michigan, and then Nichols joined the Navy from 1965 until 1966. When his stint in the Navy ended, he joined the U.S. Army in 1967. He completed his basic training at Fort Knox and was sent to Vietnam in August 1968. He was first wounded, though not a serious injury, on January 26, 1969, and it was reported that he wanted to return to active duty as soon as possible. So, when he was healed up, Specialist Gary Nichols went back into the fighting. Sadly, he was killed in action in Vietnam on May 7th when his defensive position that he was guarding became under attack. He left behind his parents, 2 brothers, 4 sisters, and his fiancée, Miss Donna Nelson. I always have to stop by and say hi to Mike, too. Old Mike Manitou. He was my music buddy here at our farm here in Mortons Gap at the pumpkin patch. So I always have to say hey to Mike. Here we come across 2 very prominent Mortons Gap citizens back in the day in the early to mid-1900s. This is Clifton Pratt Edwards and his wife, Alberta Carey. Now, Clifton Pratt was born on February 11th, 1883, to Wiley H. and Charlie Lovin Edwards. His mom was a Lovin, who was one of the pioneer families here in Mortons Gap, and there are a lot of Lovins here at Old Salem. But Pratt and his wife, Alberta Carey, who he married in October 1913, again, were prominent citizens here in Mortons Gap. Pratt Edwards was a farmer, but he also was a partner and manager at the Harrison store here in the Gap for over 30 years. The Harrison store was originally the Kington store for the Kington mines, and we'll meet Mr. Kington in a minute. But after retiring from the Harrison store, Pratt Edwards worked as a cashier for Planters Bank in the town and eventually became president of the bank. So, in addition to the bank and the store, he also managed the Grand Opera House here in Mortons Gap, which was kind of a movie theater where they'd have movies and stage shows and vaudeville type things in the early 1900s through at least the 1920s. Mr. and Mrs. Edwards never had any children, but Mrs. Edwards stayed very busy and was quite the social butterfly and heavily connected to all parts of Mortons Gap society. You constantly saw her in the papers, in the Arlington Bee and the Madisonville Hustler and Messenger. And she was often associated with different ladies groups and clubs and always having parties and gatherings. But Pratt Edwards, her husband, passed away on August 20th, 1967, and Alberta died on December 15th, 1984, at the ripe old age of 90. Okay, we've made our way across the road now. We're still to the left of the church. However, we'll head over next to the right side of the church to see Mr. Kington. But it was a beautiful day when I filmed this. Just absolutely perfect weather. Just beautiful. Here we have a gentleman I didn't realize was here at Old Salem. It's Everett Tigg. This is my great-grandfather's brother. So I didn't realize Everett was here at Old Salem. So stop and say hi to him. Now, anyone who watched our previous video, our cemetery stroll at Flat Creek, you know that I'm fascinated by cemeteries, and I especially love old ornate, like tombstones and graves and things. So angels are always one of my favorites in the graveyard. They're just peaceful and beautiful and just neat looking. But I like any interesting little landmarks or monuments in a graveyard. But anyway, now we're moving on to a gentleman named William Ward Kington, who was very influential here in the southern Hopkins County, but specifically in the town of Mortons Gap and in what is called the White City area. Here we have William Ward Kington, born in 1861, died in 1944, and his first wife, Emma Louise Lovin Kington. Their daughter, Annie Marie Kington, is also buried here. Sadly, she died when she was 10. One of his uncles, Walter Perryman Kington, and a first cousin, Hanson Kington, are also here in this Kington plot area. But W.W. Kington, William Ward Kington, was born on June 14th, 1861, to George and Susan Kington in the Barnsley area. At some point in his early life, his parents divorced and left their children to the care of other relatives, possibly the maternal grandmother, Louisa O'Brien. Reportedly, Ward never forgave his mother for leaving, but his feelings weren't as harsh towards his father because his dad told him he was going to go west and make his fortune and then come back and get the children. But after George Kington left and went out west, he was never heard from again. But the mother did pop up later, remarried in eastern Kentucky with 2 other children, so apparently she did just leave her life behind. But by age 12, William Ward Kington, or Ward Kington, was working at the St. Bernard Company's South Diamond Mine near Mortons Gap. Throughout his teens and early adult life, Ward worked at nearly every position in the mine and learned the trade extremely well. So well, in fact, that when he was around 40 years old in 1901, he started his own mine, the Kington Wolf Mine, which ran from 1901 until 1906. In 1907, he took a bold step and started the Kington Coal Company and opened an impressive mining operation at a place called White City, which was located in an area known as Moss Hill, which is about 4 miles east of Mortons Gap. An entire community soon grew up around the White City mine. At its height, the mine housed and employed about 350 men and their families. While being president of the coal company, William Ward Kington also stayed heavily involved with the town of Mortons Gap. He helped organize and was president of the Planters Bank in town. He also built a local ice plant and started the Mortons Gap Ice and Light Company in 1914. He also reportedly built the main business block buildings that you see here in 1904 in Mortons Gap. He also donated land and money to the town's Baptist church and served on the city council for 23 years. In 1920, he sold the White City mines to Brent Hart for $500,000, which was a huge high point for Kington and his family, and was the biggest deal in Hopkins County up to that point. Unfortunately, he also had a lot of hardship as well. Of course, he married Emma Louise Lovin in February 1882, and the couple would go on to have 8 children, 5 girls and 3 boys. The family possibly lived at this house on Crooked Street in Mortons Gap, and his wife Emma likely died in this home in 1914 at age 48. He also faced some financial hardship after he remarried a second time, and later divorced a woman named Minnie Mock Spivey. And his interests were also hit hard in the land bust in Florida in 1925. He remarried again, however, in 1926 and seemed to find some level of happiness. This time he married a nurse named Bernie Walker. While not extremely wealthy, he died a financially stable man. And in the end, I've always been impressed by him. He was just a self-made man that no matter what happened to him, he always pulled himself up by the bootstraps and kept moving forward and kept, being a success. So anyway, William Ward Kington died on May 25th, 1944 at the age of 82, and of course is buried here at Old Salem. Here we have the Uzzell family, Cecil A. and his wife Lucy, and their son Cecil Walter. The couple, Cecil and Lucy, were married in 1934 and had one son, Cecil, on September 5th, 1935. Now, Cecil Walter went to the schools here in Mortons Gap and graduated from Mortons Gap High School in 1953. Not long after leaving school, he decided to join the Army and did his training at Fort Knox. Upon completion of his time in the Army, he decided to become a state trooper and was first assigned at a post near Pikeville. Now, on May 28, 1964, sadly, he and a fellow state trooper named Elmer Mobley received an emergency call and raced towards a scene that needed help. Now, it had been raining really heavy that day, and unbeknownst to the 2 state troopers, there had been a rock slide on a curve on one of the major highways in the area. And unfortunately, they didn't see the rock slide until they were right on top of it and hit it head on. Sadly, troopers Mobley and Uzzell were both killed on impact when they hit the rocks. At the time, Cecil Uzzell had only served 2 years with the state police. May he rest in peace. I actually forgot how big this cemetery was. I was thinking it was smaller. It takes a while to walk from one end to the other. It gets a little warm on a sunny day. Another prominent Mortons Gap citizen we can meet here at Old Salem is a man named Benny Rash. Now, Benny Rash was born on March 24th, 1925, and was the son of David and Viola Rash. When Benny was 17 years old, he became a Marine First Class during World War II with the 2nd Marine Division, and he served in the Pacific Theater during the war and fought in the battles at Saipan and Okinawa and several others. He came home, of course, and married Wanda Blanks in August 1946, and following the war he worked in the coal mines. At one point in the 50s, he also served as the police chief at Arlington. He was also the driving force behind building the war memorials here in Mortons Gap in 1983 through 1984. For those that don't remember, he even made a huge recreation of the famous Marine Corps Memorial in Washington, D.C., the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. The Mortons Gap version of the Marine Corps Memorial had life-size figures on an 18-foot base and weighed close to 6,000 pounds. At its highest point, the monument was around 35 feet tall. He also had other memorials there to coal miners, as well as the servicemen that served and those that died in World War I and II, as well as Korea and Vietnam. Benny died on January 30th, 2009 at 81, or 83, excuse me. Before he passed, he actually took down the Iwo Jima monument because he was afraid folks, wouldn't take care of it, and he was afraid of it being vandalized and not being well taken care of. So after he passed, there was an auction, and my parents actually bought some of the memorials from the Mortons Gap area. So I'll try to show some pictures of those here. They're at our farm. So thank you, Benny. Thank you for your service, and we hope you rest in peace as well. Now, if you watched our previous cemetery stroll video at Flat Creek, you know that we talked an awful lot about the Morton family here in Mortons Gap, a pioneer family. But this is another grandson of Thomas Morton, the original settler here in the late 1700s. And Needham Perry Morton, who was born in 1851. According to his obituary, he was a pioneer citizen, well known throughout the county. And he was a carpenter, long associated with the St. Bernard Coal Company and the West Kentucky Coal Company. And he was a charter member of the Christian Church here. He died of influenza in 1927. Here we have somebody who's just an early resident with an interesting tombstone. His name was James Marion Lovin. I think he was born here in Hopkins County on November 2nd, 1832. And he married Louisa V. Bone in March 1854 here in Mortons Gap. So he and his family were one of the many Lovins here in the early part of the county. So yeah, there's a lot of Lovins here at Old Salem. So his brother John Wesley Lovin also has an interesting tombstone here as well. But here you see James Marion Lovin. Now, this is a really tragic story, and I won't go into too many details. I mean, I know it happened quite a while ago, but I also know there are a lot of people that still mourn the family. This is the Faith family, Freddie, Karen, and their young son, Tracy. On Saturday morning, January 27th, 1973, the family visited the bank here in downtown Mortons Gap, and they proceeded to cross the railroad tracks in the middle of town. Now, this wasn't the main crossing where, the bars come down and the lights flash. This was a secondary crossing. I'll try to show a picture of where that crossing was. CSX actually removed it, a while ago. I'm surprised it wasn't moved sooner because it was always pretty dangerous. But anyway, Freddie Faith saw one slow-moving train on one set of tracks because it was a double track then, but apparently did not see a northbound train on the main track. The train struck the car on the left side of the car with a great force, throwing it nearly 162 feet down the track. The mother, Karen, and son Tracy, just 7 years old, were pronounced dead at the scene, and the father, Freddie, sadly died in the emergency room a short while later. Miraculously, a fourth member of the family, the couple's other son, 8-year-old Freddie Joe, survived with just a broken leg. Although the incident took place in Mortons Gap, it kind of harkens back to a video I did for the museum a couple of years ago called Dangers at the Double Tracks, which you can find here on our channel, which detailed the perils of having two railroad crossing lines, two main lines crossing at one place here in Nortonville. Now, in this case, in the Mortons Gap case, it was a double track that was the issue, and a secondary crossing that didn't have any signal warnings to warn folks of oncoming traffic. Interestingly, several reports from the scene that day said that the train didn't blow its whistle as it came into town. During an official inquest, 2 workers on the train testified that the whistle was blown, so it was ruled an accident. But it was a very sad, tragic chapter in local history. So rest in peace, Freddie, Karen, and little Tracy. I show this grave just to mention all the different symbols and symbolism that used to be used on old gravestones. Different figures or symbols stood for different religious beliefs or represented different social groups that people belonged to. Like this one here, where it has the log or the wood, tells you that this gentleman belonged to the Woodmen of the World Fraternal Society. An obelisk, of course, is an ancient Egyptian symbol for eternal life, so you see those in cemeteries. Broken wings often signified someone who died young or, a life cut short. And again, it's just one of the many things that I find really interesting about old cemeteries. Well, that does it for today in our stroll here at Old Salem. I thought I'd put my camera up here. I apologize if it's shaky. We're driving away from the cemetery now. I always thought this drive was just beautiful and a little sad at the same time, but just one of the prettiest drives going from a cemetery. But thank you for joining us today at Old Salem. We hope to see you again soon here on the Nortonville Library and Museum YouTube channel. But thanks again for watching.